globe-trotting wine and spirits aficionado. I was just talking to Jen off screen, and I was just saying that she always seems to be 2 steps ahead of the next big trend, and we're going to get into that a little bit in a moment. So I want to say thank you very much, because I always appreciate the time it takes for people to take out their time to come and speak to little old me. So welcome, Jen. It looks like Jen has... Oh, there we go. Welcome, Jen. How are you? I've got a few issues right now with your connectivity. Just give me 2 moments. Oh, there we go. Is that going to work? Classic. There we go. We've got sound now. I do love when technology goes completely wrong. We can put people on the moon, but we still can't get proper connectivity like a couple of blocks away in Victoria. How are you?
I'm very well. Happy to be talking to you this Monday morning.
It's very interesting right now because the way things are going in Victoria, we're both in Victoria right now, and we've seen each other at the bar. But this seems easier and better and more in line with current standards for the CDC
than us to. I know.
Actually, just to meet up at Clive's and have a drink and do the interview face to face.
Right. I mean, we could have done that too. We could do it at another time because it's unusual that we are in the same town during this time. So yeah, this online is more apropos of how everyone's communicating.
So you've had a super interesting career, because I feel I always talk pre-internet, because I started my life in the industry before internet, really before email and all this sort of stuff. Like, there was the odd forum here and there, and as I said when I gave you your intro, you've always sort of been 2 steps ahead of the trends, and you were like, oh, I didn't really ever think of that. Do you feel like what was your sort of start in the industry? You left college and you started working for Remy? I can never pronounce that second word. I'm just going to say Remy Martin.
Remy. It's okay. Yeah, you can say Remy Martin. That was what it was. So after college, I actually worked at a brokerage firm in Vancouver, and then was looking for a different line of work. And Vintage Consultants was the name of the distributor here in Vancouver, and they were a division of Remy Amérique, which was the American U.S. division of Remy Martin, Remy Cointreau, actually, and they had a lot of large spirit brands, and then they had a wine division. And I guess in Canada, there were there were different offices in each province, and each had a different portfolio. So I worked for them for a number of years, and it was a great place to begin because I worked for some very wonderful people, Daryl Weinbrun, Richard Karras, who taught me a lot. I had the interest, and I took the job in the first place, which was at that time Daryl's assistant or something. I was 22 or 1 or something, and I, he taught me a lot he was a very good wine taster and just an extreme professional. Richard ran the sales team. So, I filed papers and typed letters, and then I got into logistics and some ordering and things, but I learned a lot about the industry. But the reason I took the job in the beginning was because as you can see, I'm in this wine cellar, my dad's. My parents entertained a lot. My dad made wine, and pretty good wine, but also collected whiskeys and was always interested. So both my brother and I really learned from a young age about things that, I don't know, not a lot of people did, not a lot of kids did. Chartreuse. My dad always has chartreuse after dinner in these little glasses.
I'm still educating 45-year-old people on what chartreuse is.
Yeah. So that was, chartreuse was, a regular word in our house. Anyway, so I worked for Remy Amérique for some time, and then I met a guy who would become my husband, because he had started a winery for Concitoro, and we were going to be importing it. So we worked together. He was living in Chile already. He was from Chicago, distantly, and then fell in love, and I moved to Chile to be with him. And then I started working for Concitoro when I was there.
So that's the big one. Like, that's a pretty big move, because we're talking, like you said, 1996. South American wine wasn't really a thing anywhere. Like, it was consumed in country, but it wasn't a thing in America or Canada. Like, what was obviously love makes everything blind, and so making a move to Chile,
definitely.
was it really just for the relationship, or were you sort of like going, you know what, Chilean wine might blow up?
Well, it was definitely for the relationship, I have to say, but it was also, we were both in the industry effectively. I mean, Art had started Connoisseur. He found Ed Flaherty, the winemaker. He developed the name. He took Chimbarongo, the Conchitoro sort of dormant winery, or it was making 1.5 liters at that time, bulk wine, and he really turned it into what is now one of the better wineries. And especially in the portfolio of Conchitoro, because it's it's organic, and they've got a really good they've developed really well. So it was for love initially, but wine was so ingrained. So I did wine education and domestic sales with two different departments. I ran those departments for Conchitoro, and it was very interesting because I didn't speak a lick of Spanish when I moved there in the first place. So I had to learn. Obviously I had to learn, but it's not as easy as, everyone said, oh, at least it's Spanish, it's okay. It wasn't that easy, but it definitely happened quickly because it had to. I mean, I had to communicate with my sales teams and people, fellow employees and associates. So I learned in a couple of months. I'm still not, as fluent as I'd like to be, but I am fluent. I mean, I'm at 80%. And I'm so thankful for that, because after we left Chile and moved to Miami, I mean, languages in Miami really are, mostly Spanish and some English. So the Spanish really helped me living in Miami. And that's no joke. I mean, it was helpful, and just, it never improved. I have to take a few lessons.
What was the biggest hurdles sort of building out that brand in Chile in those years outside of the Spanish?
So I'll tell you, you're right in saying that wine was becoming, more interesting to people in the Northern Hemisphere. Conchitoro, as I understand it, is still the largest winery in the Southern Hemisphere and a public company, and they are a behemoth, and they are very, very professionally run by the same family that owned them and has worked. Many of the brothers and sisters, Eduardo is, CEO, and Chavela runs marketing and so on. So it didn't seem to me as if it was just a burgeoning beverage, wine that is from South America or from Conchitoro. They were very, Don Melchor was a very well-known, very high-rated wine. And this was very exciting. I was there for the beginning of Almaviva. So when they developed that project, it was, leading up to it. And, there were deep pockets and a lot of support behind it. And they built a beautiful facility. And, as you know, that wine's become lauded around the world as a 100-point wine. And it was very exciting to be there at that time, learning about the Tetra Paks and the box wine, the mass market within the country, the domestic market, but then also looking at how, what a spread they controlled from Tetra to 100-point wines, and how to manage that was just fascinating. So I learned a lot. I definitely learned a lot, and worked with some very good people who, it was really next level for me in this industry, international and domestic. So it didn't seem as though the world was learning as much as it actually was, because they were so professional at it. Now, it was very interesting doing wine education on premise in Santiago at some of these great restaurants, because, again, a lot of people, we know this from France probably and other places, domestic wine consumption is not always as elegant as, a bottle with a cork and foil and the whole thing. It's sometimes a Tetra Pak. It's sometimes a jug you take down the street and get filled up. So the wine education for the meseros and the wait staff and the managers and whomever was, did have a learning curve, because it was a different presentation, a different quality, and required, it required knowledge to sell.
Yeah, I think some
So
people
that was fun.
over romance it sometimes. Like when you go to Tuscany and stuff like that, the way you drink wine in Tuscany and even in France, it's in a goblet, and like something like this,
Mm-hmm.
terrazzo,
Mm-hmm.
and poured off a box, but it's really fantastic Chianti, and people sort of over romance. I think the Western population over romance the nature of how the locals actually drink wine.
Exactly. And, I think one of the interesting things that does resonate, and I remember so well from that time, is that Art used plastic corks for the first time in connoisseur, which was a real, the screw cap and the plastic cork were definitely controversial in the industry. And, as we know, a corked wine, for those that are actually detected, represents, very little. It's enough that if you it's significant. It's a significant loss. And it's not always just the best quality or the worst quality cork. It just happens sometimes. It's a natural product. So a screw cap or a plastic cork can preserve wine. Now, it's not as sexy, and obviously you're not probably going to use it for your best wines, because there is so much to a bottle of wine that is, ceremony, especially when you're in a restaurant. And touching the cork, smelling it, whatever people like to do that makes no sense. It's part of that feeling, especially when you're hosting guests and or a date, or you're on a date night. So wine is a very, very interesting industry, as are spirits, or as is the spirit industry. Not the least of which are the ingredients in the bottle. I mean, gosh, we could talk about this for days, but Conchitoro took some risks, which was interesting. And that was an exciting place to be, not just Almaviva, but the plastic corks and, many things. Choosing the distributor, they had Banfi, and, so I learned a lot about distribution, and it led me to, I guess that's where my frustration began with big industry in the beverage world, was that, pay to play. That was my first introduction to pay to play. If you carry our wines, we'll buy your menus, we'll do that, we'll incentivize the situation. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I like that.
Yeah.
So that got me thinking.
And so what made you make the move to Miami?
Well, Art had started a company in Miami with a friend. It was a wine company, B2B wine. So it had to do with his desire to move. And I was pregnant with our first son. And I never thought I would live in Miami, frankly. I'm from here. I'm from Vancouver. I thought if I were to live in the US, I would like to live in San Francisco. I would have liked to. But we moved to Miami nevertheless, and it was an interesting place to be. And I've been there for 20 years now. I mean, I've been up here 5 months helping my parents, but my children are 21 and 19 now. So I've effectively raised them there. It was a very interesting place to move to and to raise children, and not even looking back, I knew it right away. I loved it because it was very multicultural. There were, first of all, in Miami as residents, there were a lot of Latin American people, Cuban, Dominican, I mean, every country represented, Brazil, and then a lot of tourism, and, there's a lot of hedonism, but I loved the Haitian, everything, all the mix. It wasn't just a clean, sanitized white US city, and there's segregation and there are issues everywhere of racism and cross-culturalism, but Miami had grit and was a really interesting place to be and learn and to start new things. Now, it was also the platform, Bacardi is based there, and it is also second and third, it sort of wavers between alcohol sales in the US. So it's a platform for a lot of big brands to launch their products. There's always a party every night, at least 50 in Miami, some hotel, and someone's sponsoring a party and everyone's drinking whatever booze is free. So that frustrated me too, that people weren't, when I started learning about craft brewing and craft distilling, they didn't have a voice. There wasn't a way for them to communicate and get out there and have the same opportunities as big brands that had deep pockets. It's still the case.
Mm-hmm.
It'll never not be the case, but market share in the last decade or so has been, happily has taken more than what's comfortable for those big brands, I think, which is great.
Which I always find it funny when I see those statistics, because I remember like with you starting craft spirits, I think that's how we originally met, was in New Orleans. I think Donnie Ronan
Hmm.
connected us.
Yeah, Donnie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think I always really get it does bug me when I read these reports about the breweries and the craft distilleries and stuff. They're like, oh, well, macro breweries have lost 3% to the craft brewery market. I'm like, yeah, but a big macro beer brand has lost 3% to 45 little breweries. We're not talking like one little macro, like microbrewery has taken that 3% from the macro brewery. We're talking that 3% spread
Yeah.
across all the distilleries and all the breweries that are existing in the craft space. But because what year did you start craft?
I started craft in 2000, formally in 2011. When I moved to Miami, I worked with a couple of guys from Spain who started the Miami International Wine Fair. And they didn't have much wine experience, but but they're from Spain and they had wine culture in their blood. And they wanted to start this wine fair, and they had a good business plan and a good model. So I worked on that with them to get that off the ground for a couple of years. Then I left because I had a second child, Oliver, and then I went back in 2009 to GM it and run it for a couple of years. And that's when I started learning, because it was a wine fair and it was a good size. We ran it in the Miami Beach Convention Center. But that's when I started getting phone calls from, some spirits brands that were interested in, and we know this, getting into the wine market. Some smaller spirits brands will choose a wine distributor to distribute their product if the distributor is amenable, because there was more of a hand sell, there was greater care taken, there may be a smaller distributor. Anyway, so I was getting, Nicholas Palazzi was bottling his amazing cognacs in France, and I was running a seminar program, and he wanted to, as I've said, reach that community. And then that started piquing my interest. And at that time, the craft beer industry was rather healthy. I mean, at least we were hearing about certain, Blue Moon and so on, that came to be purchased and went massive. But, there was an interest that people had in the way that they had been interested in learning about wine. And when you were talking about, wine becoming just that to people, something that they could learn about, that they could talk to their friends about, that was a little bit elitist, a little nerdy. Beer started becoming that as well, right? And so people dabbled in trying to make it at home, or they've done it. My dad used to do that, turn to vinegar once. I remember that. It was funny when we went away on a trip. But people were dabbling in it or watching, some really good people who'd been. Hi, Mom. Yes, sorry. My mom. So people had been dabbling in making these micro level, really special beers, and that was growing, and that they were then moving it, and a lot of those brewers then turned into distillers, or had a beer background. We've seen that progression take place too, which has always been interesting. So I was living in Miami, watching these, small spirit producers and bottlers pop up, and, not know where to go, what to do, how to connect. And then seeing all these big brands in Miami just sort of washing over people's ability to learn something new, but just not really caring. Like they were interested, but they didn't know how interested they were yet. So then I was like, okay, I got to do something on my own. So I left the wine fair and I started Craft Spirits and Beer, it was called, basically, and Spirited Sirens, which was trying to get, as the name suggests, women, doing tastings for women, especially whiskeys, and it morphed into various other things, but it was an education platform to teach, because what I really believe is that big brands make fantastic booze, don't get me wrong, and they have a lot of money for education, and they do a lot of great bartender programs. They give a lot of support. They're integral. I would never want to do away with them. That's not my point. But I'm trying to level the playing field a little bit to give craft distillers and brewers and winemakers, for that matter, a place or a platforms and a place where people can come and learn. Because now during COVID more than ever, you and I have talked about this, people purchase far more off premise, almost 99%. And so they're not having the conversation over the bar about, or from the bartender or their own interest, like maybe I should try that rye or that, or do you have something local to put in a Manhattan? Or, what's new, what's on your mind? Nor are they necessarily getting that in a liquor store, because sometimes they just want to get in and out because they got their mask on and they can't have the conversation. Or they're a drive-by window or phone, and the person on the other line is incentivized by a big brand, so they're going to push whatever is going. So now more than ever, it's important to talk about the genius and the quality and, where it is available to buy some of these lesser known interesting brands, because they need help in their communication.
Yeah, I remember when craft spirits really started making a big push, and we talked about this as well, as like the amount of articles that came out saying that craft spirits was just going to be like a little blip. Nobody was going to pay much attention to it. People will still drink Tanqueray or Bombay. No one's going to go and spend money on a craft gin. And how they thought it was going to be a big blip. And now, like in BC alone, we have 75, almost 75, 80 distilleries just in the province alone. And since you've been up here in BC for the last 5 months, what has been the big eye opener for obviously our craft beer scene in BC is just absolutely insane. I'd like to really know how many pubs in Victoria actually still pour like Canadian and macro beers, because I can't see it being very much, because there's a lot of craft beer.
No, it's really interesting, because down in the States, you'll find people that'll do that. Like, I'd like a bud, sleeve a bud or something like that. But up here, people are really faithful. They're really beyond, I think people off premise will buy like kokanee or whatever. I bought a flat of Lucky for the kids to play beer pong. But but I do think it's so interesting here, the interest level and the density. I mean, I think I heard the other day there are 183 craft brewers in the province in BC alone. Yeah, which is really interesting. And I mean, I've been learning, there are a couple of breweries up in Whistler, and you brought this up, which was so important, that a way to generate revenue for some of these craft distillers and brewers is to sell their merch.
Mm-hmm.
And, bigger companies are doing, they give that away as swag and POS and things like that. But smaller companies can really generate, because people want to support, or they want to, it's cool. It's like, hey, I got a t-shirt they don't have many, and they don't have much, this session or this limited release is out or whatever, but I got a shirt for it. And, there are mini cult followings, which I love, because it does convey support. That's the kind of support, in this marketing world. It's really hard to qualify and quantify the budgets and the marketing plans that these beverage companies develop, small or large. Like, how do you know if a shirt or the sunglasses translates to a bottle purchase, or the cocktail, off menu cocktail with that spirit in a bar? It's really hard to do that. That's a big question mark. But craft beer, I mean, BC, since I've been here, I'm always really happy about the Victoria Distiller story. Empress Gin has really taken off. That was great for Peter and those guys. Frustrating, I'm sure, the growth was fast, but
it outsold Hendrick's.
Shelter. Yeah, isn't that exciting? I mean, how great is that? I put it in, Bar Journe in the last couple of years that's been open, and people go nuts over it because of the color and because it changes color. I called it the age of Aquarius, because when you put the certain tonic waters in, it turns pink from purple. People love it. And that makes me really proud. that it comes from here. And, I think serving spirits, craft spirits, in far off lands is wonderful. I think it's the responsible move to do locally.
Mhm.
I wish more bars would carry local spirits. I'm really proud of Shelter Point. I mean, I went there 5 years ago and it looked amazing. I didn't try any spirits at the time. They hadn't released any 5, 7 years ago. And, you suggested to buy the collective, which I bought. It's lovely.
Yeah.
And I'm really happy and you are such a great supporter of Canada wide and especially BC of distillers and bartenders. So hats off to you with all the work you do.
Well, for me, I just find like it's still a niche. It's still such a niche market. Like I think we get a little caught up in our little social media bubble of like what the algorithm feeds
Yeah.
us, how craft spirits are doing. But then when you really start delving into it and talking to these distillers about, especially here in BC, we only can do 50,000 liters as our maximum output if you're a designated craft, which I think is insane. But then you really start talking to people, and it's a slow burn. Like even my BC Spirits platform has been a slow burn. I get X amount of video watches, I get X amount of likes and all this sort of stuff because it's still such a niche little market. But going back to marketing, it's a very interesting conversation when it comes to swag because I feel there's been a definite shift from what you were saying about like how do you quantify a pair of sunglasses at a big party event turns into actual bottle sales. Do you think that there is still a certain level of old school thinking when it comes to marketing in the way of let's do a big party, like Tales of the Cocktail is perfect. Like the amount of money that gets spent on parties at Tales of the Cocktail, are you really going to get that sale when that person goes back to their bar in their hometown? Do you think that the marketing needs to shift more to that sort of online sort of, you can get way better figures from Facebook marketing and Instagram and all that sort of stuff than you can from the old school mentality of let's throw a big party, spend a bunch of money, give out a bunch of swag, and hopefully that'll turn into sales?
Well, I definitely think COVID has put an axe through that. So yes, I would agree because, I mean, people are socializing and they are gathering, but it's not legal here or anywhere really. Legal is the wrong word, but it's not being done to the level that we once knew. And when that will resume, I don't know. So this is what we've got right now. And I think I've talked to a couple of people at HH Global and Bacardi, London, let's say, that are running big marketing programs. And listen, we know even back in the day, let's say that was a year ago and further back, that a lot of these big companies have big marketing budgets, and they've got to spend them somehow. And because they've always known that there's really no way to quantify the spend versus the brand faith, they do it with blind faith, and they go ahead and do it because they've got to be putting money into something, and whether it's a party or t-shirts or but then it's also at Tales of the Cocktail, that's a very concentrated week of getting in front of the right people, bartenders, the people that are beverage managers, people that are making the decisions to purchase, and they're running the programs, either behind the stick or in the office. And so that justifies. Now, I do for sure believe that everyone's scrambling to figure out. I think budgets will be shrunk, as I understand it, to because while the big companies are still generating healthy revenues because people are buying the booze, it's not as big in some cases, so budgets will shrink, and they're not throwing parties. So while the budgets are shrinking, they're also not spending the same amount, but they are going to go online, and they are going online, and they will spend online, and then we'll be inundated more and more. I mean, we're looking at screens, that's it, whether it's TV or phones, computers. So be prepared. But I think I've always just been so so I feel 100% behind the thought that when you give people education, they will make a different decision usually when it comes to beverage. So if we sat here for a minute and talked about Shelter Point and the Collective, or how they distill and how people, that's very interesting. A t-shirt, I don't know. But if you give them some knowledge, and that's why big brands like also to tell stories that aren't always that true, or they're embellished, because it really makes people feel good. Now, people, I think, should be responsible. If they're interested in booze, they should be responsible to look further than the story they're given. How many people love Casamigos because they've been told it's good? It's not
Or,
freaking good.
or the little old man that rolls around on his bicycle in the French countryside collecting elderflowers.
Yes.
I
mean, you can make a story, you can, create a story to just pluck people's heartstrings, and then they're like, oh my gosh, and they tell that to someone else. So I just, truth in looking for the truth is so important to me in transparency of production, because there's so many people that are producing such great products and they don't have the budgets to market and convey and to reach people on their phones or even with t-shirts or whatever, or then sometimes they don't care to go that route. They're fine going through the channels of a good distributor who's smaller, maybe not too small, but that's another thing I love doing, is trying to help brands choose the right distributor for the size and the level of production that they are, because it's really important to make your way into certain markets in going into it with a lot of knowledge, not just like this is the biggest and they sell a lot and they're gonna they'll do the best job for you, because it's exactly the opposite. So
and sometimes
I feel
like too, because their production's so low that all of a sudden they get a distributor that blows them up, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh crap, now we've got to actually like make 5 times as much product as we have been making for the last 3 years.
Well, yeah. Well, see, then that's that's that age-old Costco story too, and that really needs to be looked at properly before you get into that. Yeah, because it can be really attractive, but what's it going to cost? What's it going to? I had a conversation with Ed Hamilton a couple of weeks ago here on his Friday night happy hour about rum, and he told a story about when he was producing or looking to produce his pimento, and he found some guy in Jamaica who was making a couple of cases at a time, and he said, can you make 1,000 bottles? And the guy said, no, and I won't, because I can't replicate the quality of, obviously the conversation sounded much different and was probably much lengthier, but that was the bottom line. He couldn't produce it in how he wanted to live his life, the quality level for what Ed needed. So yeah, I mean, there's something so lovely in any size of production when it's made well. Mike Nicholson is this great 30-year master distiller in Scotland, 3rd generation. He's retired now, but I always find it fascinating. Peter Hunt's the guy that turned me on to chatting with Mike, and I flew Mike to Miami one year to.
He's retired.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. No, he's not that retired actually, because he's been doing a few things, but he's fascinating to talk to, because I come with my torch for small brands and small production, and he's like, well, let me tell you a little bit about big production and why it's so fascinating and interesting. So he would tell me such interesting stories about whiskey production and resting the stills and using caramel color to even out. Imagine how much Black Label Johnny Walker is made, and if it's 1 color off of someone's bottle at home to a new one they purchase, they'll be up in arms about it. There's such in the industry at large, so many contradictions I find, or just that spectrum that is represented on both ends in so many cases, like the craft distillers and the cask strength whiskey club aficionados. They want everything different every single time, because that's interesting. But then there's Johnny Walker drinkers that want it same, same, same every time. And can you imagine how hard it is? Well, for us it would be to make whiskey the same way, same
All
color,
the
same
time.
and good quality whiskey.
Yeah. That's one thing that like the craft distillers, and I've done a few things with ADI and stuff. You get that sort of, well, we make it all by hand, and like I get that, feel you 100%, but how do you do it over and over and over and over again? Especially some of the craft distillers I've worked with here in BC, they've gone from small little still setups to like a brand new, like Sheringham, small little still setups to a brand new facility. I'm like, I even asked Jason, I was like, how did you scale your recipes and everything so that everything sort of went the way you wanted it to? And he's like, we were pretty lucky. I literally just sort of did the math on that was that still, this is this still, and sort of got really close, like straight off the hop first time. And I'm like, wow, because that is a big thing. Some people think you can just go from a 100 liter still to a 500 liter still and just times it by 5. And I'm like, well, that's not exactly how it works. So
No, not at all.
talking about online stuff, you've got all your events and scenes and stuff like that. And I'm very curious because one thing I was laughing about the other day is that I'm really hoping that everything doesn't stay online, because I
Yeah.
did a seminar Bar Covent Berlin this year. I did one for
Mm-hmm.
ADI because I was supposed to be at the ADI conference in New Orleans
Mm-hmm.
in March, and I did these conferences online, and I'm like, man, I really hope that they don't keep everything online, because I want to travel. I
I
want to go to Berlin
know.
in front of people. I don't want them to go, you know what, the plane tickets are pretty expensive. Can you just do your seminar online? I want to go to Berlin for 4 days, and I want to go to New Orleans for the ADI conference and stuff like that. What's your plan for the next 12 months with craft beer and spirits and all these sort of events that you've been a part of, especially with you being here in Canada?
Yeah, it's a good question. For example, ADI judging, that's been moved from February to June, and I hope it takes place in June. I mean, can't do that online. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, they could send us samples, but I can't even imagine like. So for my own efforts, I'm pivoting right now. As I said, I've been up here for 5 months. I came up here. My children are both in college. I came up to help my parents and have effectively put everything on hold because doing specialized bar consulting, niche vermouth and gin and tonic bars and fine and rare spirits bars and so on. It's really not a hot ticket item right now. But I'm watching and reading, and I'm pivoting into what I've talked to you is about, which will be some sustainable efforts in the industry. Looking to connect directly with certain companies and work with them on this year, because I think it's, in other words, I'm sort of putting the events aside for now because I'm just going to see where that goes and how that develops. And I agree with you 100%. People don't want to stay online. We go to Tales of the Cocktail, we go to Bar Convent because because a lot of the industry is behind the bar, and to get together with your peers and people from across the globe, it's a real re-energizing feeling to do that. And obviously one thing is getting to know new brands and new techniques and so on, but it's another thing just to connect with these people. And I've always seen such a vitality. Well, everyone's super hungover and tired by the end of a week at Tales of the Cocktail, but
Yeah,
there's also
it's not socially acceptable to be drunk by yourself at 2 a.m. in the morning in your office. It's completely
no,
fine.
exactly. No, I mean it's letting off steam, it's connecting with your industry. And so these things are really important. And maybe they'll take the form of, smaller visits for now, going to certain distilleries or certain places. I don't know how it's gonna, but uh, but I am shifting, at least for a while, into another area of the same industry and just watching how events and on-premise programs develop. Um, because I think sadly for some time, at least this year, we're going to be limited in terms of being, in restaurants and bars. Uh, Even though, as I said in the beginning, I think restaurants and bars, because it is so much their livelihood and they're hanging on by a thread, those who are still able to, because we've lost many, sadly, um, you know, it's going to be really important to keep supporting restaurants and bars as best we can, because they're doing it more correctly than anyone else, I think, any other, because they have to. And it's also the place we love to go and be. It's so important to, as I said, just about Tales of the Cocktail and these events where the industry likes to get together, because they provide every single day of the year where people like to get together. So it's such an important element to our socialization as humans, alcohol or not. I mean, if you're having dry January, or if you are not drinking alcohol, a restaurant or a place of, coming together, events and so on, they're so integral and vital for our human connection. And as much as I think we've all found our inner recluse and our indoorsiness, we also miss people, and bars and bartenders, restaurants provide that. But I think we're just going to have to wait a little while to get back into it. So I'm not actively looking at that side of my company. I'm going to move into just how companies can be, distillers and brewers can be more sustainable, and less of a carbon footprint, lessen their carbon footprint.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you for your time. It was lovely to hang out outside of me being at the bar.
Yeah, well, I'm coming back though.
6 feet away. I don't think we've been back since we launched the new menu. So we launched our new cocktail a couple of weeks ago.
I really want that beeswax
old fashioned.
Yes,
From Mr. Lion himself.
You make amazing cocktails, I gotta say. The creativity, and you can tell it's a passion and a really well executed one. So
thank you so much. I'll chat to you very soon. Thanks for your time, Jen.
Thank you, Shawn.